Aleph, 40A. We're on the fourth to last word on the page. We're about to turn the page of Mem and Aleph. Okay. So we mentioned this a few times. There are three verses to Birchas Kehanim. In the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple, it was read as one unit. And outside of today, we read it as 3 units. We respond Amen 3 times. In the Kehanim say the first verse, the second verse, and the third verse, and after each verse, we respond Amen. So the question is, what's the difference? Why is there a difference between the Beis Hamikdash and what we do today, current modern practice, contemporary practice? Okay, so just briefly outside, basically in today, when someone makes a blessing, we respond Amen. And most blessings have the following format: Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, something, etc. Amen at the end. In the Beis Hamikdash, they had a different type of blessing and a different type of response. So the Gemara will give an example of what the blessing was, and then we'll learn that the response couldn't just be an Amen; it had to be a tehillah, a praise. I'll explain. Okay, so we're at 40A, first word, 40B. I'm sorry, top of the page. The Kol Kach Lama. Why is there a difference between what they said in the Beis Hamikdash and in other words, that they did not respond Amen, and therefore 3 verses were put as 1 unit, and contemporary practice where we say Amen at 3 points, the fisher ain't an Amen b'mikdash, because you do not respond Amen in the temple. Tanar Baran, the rabbis taught me, Amen b'mikdash. How do we know that you don't say Amen in the Beis Hamikdash? And Emar. Okay, so this is an example of a blessing that was made in the Beis Hamikdash, and this is how it goes. Kumu uborchu es Hashem. Okay, so Kumu is an introduction. Uborchu es Hashem, bless Hashem, like Kechem, your God, min ha'olam va'ad ha'olam. So Rashi says every blessing began with Baruch Hashem Elokei Yisrael min ha'olam va'ad ha'olam. So today we say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, or Baruch atah Hashem Chayim Eisam, right? So that's the example Rashi gives, or Magen Avraham. Now, let's say the blessing of Magen Avraham is a 2-part blessing, right? Because it begins as a Baruch in the front and a Baruch at the end. So it's Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Ekei Avraham, Ekei Yitzchak, Ekei Yaakov, Ekei Lagod Lagiver V'Neira, etc. And then we end with Baruch atah Hashem Magen Avraham. In the Beis Hamikdash, the blessing format was different, and it would be, where are we again? Baruch Hashem Elokei Yisrael min ha'olam va'ad ha'olam Magen Avraham. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. I'm sorry. Baruch Hashem Elokei Yisrael min ha'olam va'ad ha'olam Chayim Eisam, etc. Going through each of the blessings of Shemoneh Esrei. So that's the type of blessing that was made. Okay. So that's how we know the blessing, but it's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the response, right? That for every blessing you conclude it with a tehillah, with a praise. What is the praise? The praise is Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus L'Olam V'ad. Shenemar, because the verse continues, V'Yivorchu Shem Kavodecha, they'll bless your honorable name. U'meroimim al kol bracha u'tehillah. So this literally means that your name is higher than blessing and praise, but it also means that it should be uplifted with bracha, with a blessing, and with a tehillah, with a praise. In other words, i.e., conclude every bracha with a tehillah. A kol bracha u'bracha, tein le tehillah, provide a praise, and what's that praise? It's Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus L'Olam V'ad. Okay. Let's begin. The next, so again, our parak began with things that need to be spoken out in Hebrew, and one of the most importantly for our Masechta is the Parsha of Sotah. When the Kohen reads, the Parsha of Sotah does not need to be read in Hebrew. When the Kohen reads the curses to the woman, he can read it in any language he understands. However, certain things are required to be said in Hebrew. For example, Birchas Kehanim must be said in Hebrew, and the Torah reading of the Kohen Gadol. So, what are we talking about here? On Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol will perform the Avodah, the service, and then at some point in the middle of the service, he would read the portions of the Torah that deal with Yom Kippur. Now, it's interestingly enough, we've just been going through these parashas, right? We went through Parashas Achromos. The beginning of Parashas Achromos deals with the service. The vast majority of the avodah the avodah, the service of Yom Kippur is contained in Parashas Achromos. Then we roll. So today we organize our parashas. Achromos, Kedoshim, Emor. The beginning of Achromos deals with the service of Yom Kippur. Then we have the conclusion, which deals with Arayos, Kedoshim, which is a very short section, and then toward the a little past the middle of Parshas Emor, we deal with the laws of the holiday of Yom Kippur. Ach ba'eser l'chodesh hashvi'i. Anyway, Tanu was nefesh seichem. Tisha b'chodesh b'erev ha'derech tisha b'adchem. So it's a short portion, and it's not far from the first portion. It's just a couple of so in the Sefer Torah, I'm sure everyone's seen the inside of Sefer Torah, it's written as what we call amudim. These are chapter heading. These are full columns that go from the top to the bottom. So if you count the number of amudim between Achromos and Emor, I don't know, it's maybe 6 or 7, not that many, maybe even less than that. So basically, it's very easy for him to quickly roll it from one place to the next. What's the next portion that deals with Yom Kippur? It's in the end of Parshas Pinchas. Parshas Pinchas deals with the karbanos, the sacrifices that are brought at every holiday. You figure from Emor to Pinchas, it's got to be, 30, 40 amudim. It's a very large space. So what he would do is he wouldn't roll the Sefer Torah there. He would read that portion by heart. And we'll discuss what we do and why we take out a Sefer Torah, etc. We'll get to that discussion. Okay. Birchas Kohen Gadol Ketzad. We're at the Mishnah on 40b. The blessings of the Kohen Gadol. This is a reference to him reading the Sefer Torah. Ketzad. How does it work? Chazan HaKnesses Neit Sefer Torah. Chazan HaKnesses is sort of the how do you call him? You call him the Gabbai today, but he's sort of the practical Gabbai. He's the Gabbai who would do this stuff. The Shamas. Very good. Neit Sefer Torah v'Nois Chil Rosh HaKnesses. He would take the Sefer Torah, he would remove it from the Aron Kodesh, and he would provide it to the Rosh Knesset, who was the Gabbai. The Rosh Knesset, nice and Skan. The Gabbai would provide it to the Skan. Who's the Skan? So on Yom Kippur, this is generally the case as well. Kohen Gadol always had an assistant, whose title was called the Skan. If the Kohen Gadol would be, for whatever reason, invalid to perform the service, the Skan would immediately take his place. Okay. Now it's interesting. The Skan is it's a very honorable position. It's also it's not a fun position because once the Skan became a Kohen Gadol, in other words, if there was ever an event that happened, and this could happen pretty easily, the Kohen Gadol, accidentally became Tamei, and he had to step down for a few days. So the Skan now took his place. Once the Skan became a Kohen Gadol, he was not allowed to serve as Kohen Hedyot. He was not allowed to serve as Kohen Hedyot. It's because you can only go up, you can't go down. So once he served as a Kohen Gadol, he would be prohibited from ever serve. He could not act as a Kohen unless he became Kohen Gadol, and he was always next in line. So sort of the next in line to the throne. So he takes him over temporarily, and until that point, he gives up his privileges to act like a Kohen. Yeah. Okay, this is a fair analogy. Okay. So he gives it to the Skan. Skan is the second, the Kohen Gadol to be, and the Skan I sent us the Kohen Gadol. The Skan gives it to the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol, I'm in a makabel. Kohen Gadol stands and he takes the Sefer Torah. V'karei Achromos. He reads the portion of the Torah of Achromos, which deals with the service of Yom Kippur, the temple service. V'ach ba'asar, and ach ba'asar, which is in Parshas Emor. Okay, the girl it's the Torah. He rolls the Torah. He closes it. He puts it. He puts it he holds it in his lap. But Aimer, we'll soon see he was able to sit because this did not happen inside the inner courtyard. It happened in the outer courtyard. In the outer courtyard, the Kohen Gadol is allowed to sit. In the inner courtyard, the only one who's allowed to sit is a Davidic king that comes from the Yehudah dynasty. And we'll see that soon. Okay. V'omer, and he says, Yeser Masha Karisa Lefnechem Kosav Kan. There's more to this Sefer Torah than I've just read to you. And the portion of the Torah that's written in Parashas Pinchas, he reads Baal Peh. He reads it without looking at the text. So he reads it by what in English we call by heart, from memory. And he makes 8 blessings. Al HaTorah, that's the standard bracha we make today. Va'al HaAvayda, for the service. Va'al HaIdaya, this is the equivalent of the Maidim bracha that we say in Shemona Esrei. Va'al Mechilas Oven, this is the type of bracha that we make in middle of Musaf on Kippur, which concludes with Meichel V'Salech Laven Yiseinu Laven Yitzam Yisrael. Va'al HaMikdash, he makes a blessing. Asher Bochar. This concludes with Asher Bochar b'Mikdash, who chooses the Mikdash. Va'al Yisrael. 1 second. Which ends with Habochar b'Am Yisrael, who chooses the Jewish people. Va'al Kahanim. And a blessing that Yakash, God chooses the Kahanim. Va'al Yerushalayim, and on Jerusalem. Va'al Hashar Tefillah, and a prayer which we'll see. We'll see what the prayer was. That's the 8th blessing. Okay. Now, we saw this process? What happens? The Sefer Torah is handled by 4 people before it gets to the Kollel. 3 people. The Kollel was the 4th one to handle the Sefer Torah. Now, there's in general a Talmudic debate. If you have a rabbi, and he has, this is the case today, and it was the case in the past, that there are different levels of students. There's this famous, my grandfather's B'nai Soscha. It's a famous story. He was not a chassid. He was not a chassid. He wasn't a student of the Baal Shem Tov. He was a rabbi, and he wrote a letter to one of the Hasidic masters, and he told him he wrote a letter to somebody who was going to ask for a blessing, and he was so impressed by the letter. He told him, tell your rabbi to come back. Come here. I want to see him. So the guy came back. He needed a blessing for children. Anyway, he came back. He told the Rabbi B'nai Soscha, says Tzvili Melech of Diniv, says the Chassidish rabbi wants to see him. So he went. He was young at the time. He was a rabbi, but he was like 24, maybe less. Very young. And he came there, and all these senior rabbis are there. And he started humming a tune. When he got there, he was they were middle of studying Torah. He joined the group. It was a very elitist group, and they were all senior rabbis. And he opens up a book, and he started humming a tune, and they were extremely offended. Like, who's this young whippersnapper? He's 23 years old, and he sits down and starts humming a tune. And we were all senior rabbis. Anyway, they wanted to tell him something. The Chassidish rabbi that was there was not, he saw through it, and he honored him, and he said, he'll be my student. Don't worry about it. Put him right in front. He was 23 years old. Everybody was much older than him. Anyway. That happens, but by and large, there is a certain hierarchy. There are senior students, there are younger students. Now, there's a big Talmudic question. We'll get to it, and I think it's in Bava Basra, which is: do you honor a senior student if the rabbi is there? You honor the senior student over the younger student. So the question is that a way of according to rabbi honor, because you're honoring his most senior student? Or as you say, no, the rabbi is present to honor us according to the rabbi, and we don't accord honor to the level of seniority of the students, because it's not appropriate. The rabbi is the one who's deserving the honor, not the students. And it might be appropriate to accord honor to senior students, but only when the rabbi is not present. When the rabbi is present, you don't. So now the Gemara really questions this whole procedure. You have the Kohen Gadol; he's like the rabbi, right? He's the senior rebbe, whatever. And then you have the shamis and the gabbai and the skan. Is that called honoring them in place of the rabbi? Kohen Gadol standing there, and the Sefer Torah is doing musical chairs here. So is that are you allowed to accord honor to a student in place when the rabbi is present? Okay, so Gemara says Shmami no cholkin Talmud Makam Harav. This Mishnah seems to imply that you could accord honor to a senior student even when the rabbi is present, because you're according honor here to the shamish, and then you're according honor to the gabbai, and then to the skan. So Gemara says Amar Abaye, no, Abaye says not a proof. Kul mishum kavod the Kohen Gadol. It's all to honor the Kohen Gadol. So you're not really honoring the shamus. You're honoring the shamish by having him honor the kohen gadol. So in other words, the honor would be accorded solely to the student and not to the rabbi. That would be the question, and that remains unanswered. Over here, ultimately, the student's honor goes to the rabbi. So therefore, it's not a proof to the question. Okay, Kohen Gadol Oimid Umekabel. The Kohen Gadol stands up and he receives a Torah. So ask the Gemara, Oimid, he stands up. Hold on a second. Mechlal, but must be that until now, what was he doing? The Yeshifu, he was sitting. But how is he allowed to sit? Sitting in the Azara. Okay, so let's just describe the temple. There's the Temple Mount, right? Which is it's actually a square. The modern day Temple Mount is not a square; it's a rectangle. That's because the rectangle portion of the square, the rectangular addition. So there was a fellow named Herod in the Talmud. They call him Hordus, and very common, by the way, to have the us, to take an English, a Latin name and add the us to it, and you'll get a Talmudical name. Right, as a side note, so it's Hordus, and you have you find that very often. Okay, so this fellow Herod Hordus, he basically he reconstructed the temple. The temple was in disrepair for already hundreds of years at that point, over 100 years, and it needed to be repaired. And he spent fortunes of money and 3 years worth of labor to make a magnificent enterprise. And the Talmud says, if you remember, we learned in Sotah Sukkah. I don't think I learned it with you. It was just before we started learning together. And Talmud said, anyone who did not witness that edifice has not witnessed a beautiful building. Beautiful building. And one of the things he did was expand the Temple Mount, which is why the current modern day Temple Mount is a rectangle. It's the portion of Al-Aqsa that was added on. That's if you're at the Wailing Wall, the Kotel, it would be the portion toward your right, and some amount of the wall, the Kotel as well is part of that section. Now, obviously, we don't know exactly where it is, despite the fact that some people do claim to know where it is. They accept the tradition is not to go on the Temple Mount. Okay, now regardless, so that's the Temple Mount. That's sort of the first level of sanctity. Someone who's Tamei Meis is allowed, he is permitted to go on the Temple Mount. The only ones that are prohibited to go on the Temple Mount is Tumah Yetzer Negof, that would be Zav Zav and Nidi Elebes Mitzera. Now, you're on the Temple Mount, then there is this structure that pops out of the Temple Mount. You have to walk up 13 steps to get it, and it's the entire. There's 13 steps across the whole thing, right? I don't know. It wasn't ADA compliant. They had a ramp. I don't know. Anyway, so around these 13 steps, there is a fence called the Seireg, and from there onwards, we don't allow Tommy Mason may not enter. It's actually a sign. I think they might even have excavations that have like that have this sign printed on it, stones, whatever it is. Anyway, hold on a second. Okay. And then from there, we have the courtyards, the outer courtyard, just a very rough description here. I'm not giving you a literal description. There's what we call the Ezras Nashim, where the women would be. So-called Ezras Nashim. Why was it called the Ezras Nashim? Because there was a balcony that was built there, and that's where the women would gather to witness the Simchas Beis Sheva celebration that happened in Sukkot, on Sukkot. And then you had the Azara, which is the inner courtyard where the temple was in that courtyard. The Mizbeach was in that courtyard as well. In the Azara, okay, let's continue the Gemara. Six lines to the bottom of the page, 40b.
Related to the Zav, that was, we learned about this, right? The closest that they could go was the
temple. They could not enter the temple.
The Nicanor gate, or was that what it was? Where they did
so the Nicanor gate was after they've already become pure. So when they were Mechusar Kippurim, they would be able to walk into Nicanor gate. So that's a good point you brought up, actually. Appreciate it. Okay, Nicanor gate. The Nicanor gate was the gate between the Ezras Nashim and the Azara. Okay, and just like you're pointing out, the Nicanor gate was not sanctified. So typically, the thickness of the walls, by the way, the temple walls were at least 8.5 feet thick. So quite a wall there. Yeah. Now it's not as thick, for example, as the walls of the old city, which are even thicker than that in some places. The corner units are way thicker than 8.5 feet. So that 8.5 feet was typically part of the Azara, with the exception of the Niknar gate. In the Niknar gate, it was not part of the Azara, so that the Zavzav and the Dilad Mitzara would be able to go in to purify themselves. Okay. Anyway, okay. 6 lines in the bottom of the page. Ein yeshiv b'Azara el amachi be'estav b'lvad. Sitting down in the Azara. The Azara again is the inner courtyard where the Mizbeach and the temple are, not the Ezras Nashim. Was only for the kings of Davidic dynasty. Shenemar v'yovei hamelach David v'yeshiv lefnei Hashem v'yemer mi'yanaychim. You find that King David was allowed to sit; nobody else was allowed to sit. So the Gemara explains, "Kid Omer of Chizda be'Ezras Nashim." We're talking about this event happened in the Ezras Nashim, where one is allowed to sit. By the way, what else was done in Ezras Nashim? Anyone remember?
Certain sorts of sacrifices?
No sacrifice. Sacrifices were only in the Azara. The Nazir would shave his head. It was a chamber there, Lishkas and Azirim, and that was in the Ezras Nashim. Okay. Hachanami be'Ezras Nashim. So the Gemara says Meisvei. We'll ask a question. Behechan Karan Bayit. Where does he read the Torah? Ba'azaram, in the inner courtyard. Or Bahar Bias. He would read it on the Temple Mount. Vayikra by Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Vayikra by Lefnei Harchayev Asher Lefnei Shar Hamayim. He would read it in the street, in the public area, which was before the gate of the water, and evidently that was on the Temple Mount. Anyway, the first opinion says it was in the Azara. So Amar of Chizda doesn't mean the Azara, it means Ezras Nashim. It means the Ezras Nashim where the Kohen Gadol is allowed to sit, and so is anybody else. Okay, the Kari Achramais v'Achbaser. He reads the sections of Achramais and Achbaser. Okay, so let's briefly. So we have Achramais, skips a little bit. He reads the portion of Parshas Emor, and then he doesn't skip what would be 30 to 40 rows, Amudim in the Sefer Torah. Instead, he reads that by heart. Gemara has a bunch of questions. Gemara will explain why. V'raminu, I'll ask a question. Medalgan b'Navi v'ei medalgan b'Torah. When we read the Haftorah, sometimes we skip. You're allowed to skip by Navi, but you're not allowed to skip in Torah. So how is the Kohen Gadol allowed to skip? Rabbi like Kasha, it's not difficult. Kam b'chdei sheyifsek hatorgaman, kam b'chdei shelo yifsek hatorgaman. So in the old, like we mentioned in previous times, the Torah reading was comprised of two parts. The Balkori would read a verse, and the translator would translate it into Aramaic. So you figure to translate a verse, I don't know, it takes 15 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, whatever it is. In those 10 seconds, the Kohen Gadol quickly rolls the Sefer Torah, so the congregation does not have to wait for him. So the Gemara asks, okay, so in other words, if it's done a 10-second roll, you're allowed to. A 2-minute roll, that you're not allowed to do. And by Navi, you're allowed to roll even 2 minutes. So the Gemara says, but we learned medalgam and Navi ve'ei medalgam b'Torah. You're allowed to roll. You're allowed to move. Roll the scroll by Navi, but not with regard to Torah. Bat kam medalgan, and how far can you roll? Ad kadei shelo yifsek hatorgaman. As while the translator is translating, then you can quickly roll. In Navi, Mechlal de b'Torah klal klaloi. But presumably, with regard to rolling the Sefer Torah in Torah, in the regular reading, you're not allowed to roll it at all. The Gemara says no. Rabbi says loikash. It's not difficult. By Navi, you're allowed to roll even in two separate topics. However, by Torah, you're only allowed to roll within the same topic. So this is the same topic. First, we talk about the Yom Kippur service. Then we talk about the laws of Yom Kippur, which is in Parshas Emor. So you're allowed to roll it. It has to be rolled while the translator is translating. So the Gemara asks, "Vatanya medalga b'Torah b'inyan echad." I'm sorry, Vatanya has been inclusive. So this is, and indeed, this brisa supports the opinion of Abaya. The brisa says, "Medalga b'Torah b'inyan echad." You're allowed to roll the Sefer Torah in one topic, u'b'navi, and with the navi b'shnei inyanim, with two topics. The kan b'kan, and both of these are limited. B'chdei shelo yifsek hatorgaman. The rolling has to be done quickly enough that the translator is still translating. You don't roll within two books of prophets. However, with the Navi of the Treyasar, the 12 books of prophets is small. Each one of those are pretty small. Then you're allowed to. You should not roll backwards an entire sefer. Backwards a little bit seems to be permitted. Okay. So that explains why the Kohen Gadol rolls from Achrei Mos to Parshas Emor, but he does not roll till Parshas Pinchas because the congregation is not going to wait. It's not respectful of the congregation to make them wait 2 minutes until that's resolved. Okay. The girl is a Torah umenicha b'cheikai. He rolls the Torah and he puts it on his lap, and he says more than what's written here, more than I speak is written in here. Why does he make this statement? The Torah, not to people shouldn't think that there was some problem with the Sefer Torah. That's why he's reading from memory. People should recognize that the reason why he's reading from memory is because he doesn't want them to wait until he rolls it. Okay, the next section he reads is he reads the Karbanos of Yom Kippur, which is in Parshas Pinchas. So the Gemara asks, so let him roll the Sefer Torah to there and let him read from there. It's too long, and you don't roll Sefer Torah publicly. So the Gemara says, okay, if that's the case, what do we do? What do we do when we have that problem? And bring 2 Sefer Torahs. So let's bring a second Sefer Torah. So there's 2 reasons proposed by the Gemara why that's not acceptable. The first reason is Rabbi Dovid Yehudah Amar Mishum Pigama Shel Rishon. People will think the first scroll is invalid. And the second reason is that would be a break that would take a few minutes to do, and you'd have to make a new blessing in the Sefer Torah, which is not necessary. So therefore, he only makes one blessing, and he continues straight. So that's the Gemara. Are we concerned that people might think the Sefer Torah is invalid? Rav Yitzchak taught Rosh Chodesh Teves occurs on which holiday? The month of, Teves. Teves is right after Kislev. It's on Hanukkah. Rosh Chodesh Teves is always on Hanukkah. So what do we do on Rosh Chodesh Teves if it's on Shabbos? We have 3 Sefer Torahs. We have one for that week's parsha, one for Shabbos, and one for Hanukkah. What am I saying? One for Rosh Chodesh and one for Hanukkah. We have that week's parsha, which would be Shabbos. So maybe Shalosh Torahs. Bring 3 Torahs. The Kara Achas Minyan Shel Yom. One of them is that week's parsha, usually Parshas Miketz. The Achas Shel Rosh Chodesh, and one would be the portion of Rosh Chodesh. The Achas Shel Hanukkah. The portion of Rosh Chodesh, by the way, is at the end of Parshas Pinchas, right? It's right next. Parshas Pinchas has all the sacrifices one after another, and then you have Achas Shel Chanukah. The portion of Chanukah is in Parshas Nasan, the Chanukah Sanasim, which is there's close to quite a distance between the 2 of them. So it's 3 scrolls. So the Gemara says, evidently, we're not concerned that somebody will think that one of the scrolls is invalid. So what's the difference between the Kohen Gadol using 2 scrolls and we using 3 scrolls? So the Gemara says, Tilsagavi betil sefer like a pagama. 3 people with 3 scrolls, there's no pagam, because each person is reading his own scroll. However, chad gaver betray sifri ika pagama. If for one person to read 2 scrolls, you think that the first scroll was invalid, and therefore we do not bring a second scroll. You make 8 blessings. The blessing on the Torah is the same blessing that we make when we read from our Torah scroll. It's Asher Baruch Rabbanu, or it's Asher Nasan Lan Torah Semes. Okay. The blessing of Avodah, that would be the blessing of the service, which is roughly similar, which would be roughly similar to the Ritzei that we say in our the portion of our Shemona Esrei which begins with the words Ritzei. Va'al ha'haidah, that would be the equivalent to Maidim. Va'al mechilas oven, which is roughly equivalent to the main blessing that we make in the Musaf, which ends with Meichel Aveinis. Where is it? Give me a moment here. Meichel v'tzalech aveiseinu l'aveinis Amei Yisrael. Okay, that would be roughly similar to the Ketikna, like we say today. These were Yerushalayim. And the next blessings were on the temple, the Kehanim, the Jewish people, and Jerusalem. And these were unique brachas that we do not have. In our current prayer, we do not have analogs to these blessings. And then there's a conclusion blessing of prayer. And what is that? Tana Rabbanan, Vashar Tefillah. It includes a few things. Tchina Rina Ubakasha. It's a prayer. The exact difference between these words is beyond my pay grade. And what is it? The Jewish people need to be saved. And it ends with Shemeat Tefillah. With Shemeat Tefillah, which is how we end. We have a prayer of Shemeat Tefillah, and that's how we end our blessing. Okay, interesting part the Mishnah left out, which the Gemara concludes. I believe this is brought down in Masechtas Yoma, which is that as soon as the Kohen Gadol finishes reading the Torah, what happened was Mikan ve'ela kol afterwards. Mikan ve'ela kol echad ve'echad maybe Sefer Torah mitach b'esai. Everyone went back to their houses. They brought a Sefer Torah v'karabai, and they would read from their own scroll. There was an Eruv in Jerusalem, so you were able to carry, and they would bring it back to the Azara v'kol kach lama. Why would they all read the scrolls and read the parasha of Yom Kippur together? To show everyone's appreciation and value that Jewish people have merited to have Torah and receive the Torah from Hashem. Okay, let's continue. Parashas Hamelech Ketzad. The next item on the list of that has to be read specifically in Hebrew is when the king reads the Torah. We'll explain what that means. When he reads the Torah, they call it Parashas Hamelech. It's the event known as Hakel. If anyone remembers from this week's Sukkot, Chabad celebrates Hakel this year. Why this year? We'll get to it in a moment. So that is Parashas Hamelech. It has to be said in Hebrew. Kate said, how is it done? Maitzai Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag B'Shmini B'Maitzah Shvius. So this is on Sukkot. This takes place after the first 2 days after the first day of Yom Tov. It's the first day of Chol Moed. It only happens the year after Shvius. It happens the 8th year in the cycle. They make him a podium. He sits on it. Because the verse states this event happens after Shemitah. What happens? So they take out a Sefer Torah. Chazan HaKnesses, the Shamash, noted Sefer Torah of Nois to the Rosh Knesses. He takes Sefer Torah and he provides it to the Gabbai. The Rosh Knesses Nois to Skan. The Gabbai provides it to the Skan Kohen Gadol. The assistant Kohen Gadol, Vaskan and Nois to the Kohen Gadol. The Skan provides it to the Kohen Gadol. He hands the Sefer Torah to the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol Nois to the Melech, and the Kohen Gadol he provides the scroll to the king. Melech Omedu Makabel. He stands and he accepts it. The Korah Yoshev and he reads the Torah sitting down. However, Agrippus HaMelech, Agrippus was the final king before the destruction of the temple. Amad the Kibel. He stood and the Korah Oimid. He stood to accept the Torah and he read the Torah standing. Shabchu Chacham and the rabbis praised him. The reason why they praised him was because he was not of Davidic dynasty, and therefore it was inappropriate for him to sit in the Azara. There's another problem. His father was a non-Jew. When he got to the verse that said, you shall not appoint a foreign king to rule over you. Zolgoain of Demois, he started crying because his father was non-Jewish. The rabbis told him about the Siyara group. They told him, don't be concerned because you are our brother, because his mother was Jewish. Now, was this the correct response or not? I believe it was the incorrect response. We'll get to it tomorrow. Okay. The Korah, he reads, Mitchila Elad Varim At Shema. He reads a lot. He really covers a lot of ground here. So he starts in the middle of toward the beginning of Chumash Dvarim. He reads Tul Shema. Then he reads Shema, which is the importance of accepting the yoke of God, of serving God. Then he reads the V'hayim Shemaya. That's what we read every day. V'hayim Shemaya is to fulfill God's mitzvahs. Asar to Asar and Kisachal la'Asar. These two portions talk about Meiser and supporting the poor. And because this is happening after Shemitah and the poor need to be supported, the king reminds us of the importance of giving charity to the poor. And then he reads Parashas Hamelech. He reads the section of appointing a king, which is actually requires him to roll backwards. Ubrachos uklolos, and the blessings and the curses. Achigomer kol parsha, until he finishes the entire section of the blessings and the curses. Brachas Kohen Gadol mevarachaysan, Hamelech mevarachaysan. He makes the same 8 blessings as the Kohen Gadol. El shanois shomer golem tachas mechilas alpin. He makes a blessing on the holiday in place of the blessing on of forgiveness. One more point before we end here, which is that the Kohen Gadol did not have a turgoman. the Kohen Gadol, I'm sorry, the king, we'll get to it, I think maybe a little bit later in the Masechta. I'm not sure if we'll get to it actually. The king is sort of, it has absolute respect. The king has a right to kill people summarily if he wishes to do that. And therefore a king does not have a translator. It's disrespectful for the king to have a translator. And therefore the king is allowed to roll around in the Chumash, even though Kohen Gadol is not. Okay, have a great day.